Happy Monday and welcome to Reading the Bible is Easy-ish, a weekly video and podcast series. I am Hogan Brock. He is Harrison Litzel. Harrison, this week we wanted to start by talking about deconstruction. So I'm curious if you would introduce that topic a little bit for people who may not have heard that word before.
Yeah. So deconstruction it's been on my Twitter feed a lot the past couple of weeks for a lot of different reasons. And it's a word that I've had some interaction with, but it's definitely kind of growing in popularity, I think. And I think people who relate to the word are using it more and more. And so it's this idea that thinking specifically about people's theological worldview or the way that people think about their faith, it's kind of this way of asking questions and of thinking through the way that their faith, the way that their religion was packaged and handed to them, and kind of deconstructing that a little bit. And for a lot of people, I think that this goes through kind of two phases of asking questions and tearing down in a lot of ways, or breaking apart, and then this kind of reimagining, this kind of reconsidering. And one of the ways that I think about this a lot is I use this word to describe some of my own journey, and how I relate to my Christian faith. And I've been accused before of this word meaning that I've walked away from the faith, or that I've given up some of the hard aspects of Christianity, some of the hard aspects of Jesus's teachings in order to fit in culture, right? That's something that's kind of been levied against people before. But I think one of the beautiful things about deconstruction is, for a lot of people, it's actually a digging deeper into their faith. They're considering and asking questions that they haven't before, and kind of thinking to the way that their faith relates to the world in ways that they hadn't previously been taught or considered. So I think it is beautiful in a lot of ways, and requires more work than some people give it credit for. But what about you, Hogan? Is that a word that you use to describe yourself, or a part of your journey, the part you're in now? What is your relationship to the deconstruction?
Yeah, it's definitely a word that I connect to and would identify with. I often think of deconstruction quite literally when I think about what it means to take apart. So I enjoy woodworking and building furniture. And so moving to Toronto, we did the lightest form of woodworking, which is putting together IKEA furniture, right? But as you go through and you put in all those little screws and all those little wooden connectors, right, you see what's holding everything together. And so the fully packaged thing that you see in the IKEA showroom, you get to put it together in your room, and you understand why it works and why it fits the way it does and why it makes the sound if you move it this certain way, right? Those sorts of things. And I think you did a great job of describing faith is the same way. So many of us just are born into some sort of faith, whatever religious tradition you follow. The odds are you still follow the one that you were born into. Statistically, that's true. And so deconstruction for me was the process of taking some literal distance and going to college and interacting with some different people and some new ideas, and saying, what about my faith? What makes my faith, and why am I saying it's mine? And so for me, that was pulling apart a number of different things, and I think I'm still in that stage for sure. So I maybe talking about it here, the School of Theology that I'm going to here at the University of Toronto is a pluralistic school of theology. So there are students who are Buddhist, Islamic, and Christian, and people who don't identify as with one religious tradition, but those three religions are all taught at the school. And so one of the first courses I'm taking this next semester is multi-religious leadership, and it's this idea that there's something to offer in all three of these places. And so this idea of pluralism is something that I'm encountering, and it's causing me to deconstruct a part of my faith that says what we believe as Christians is the only right thing. And I'm deconstructing that, not knowing if I'm going to put that piece back in or if I'm not. But I've taken it out, I'm turning it over, I'm examining it, and it may go back in, or it may be modified and put back in a different way.
Yeah, I really like that. The idea of deconstruction in a lot of ways is taking these pieces, giving them close examination, and sometimes it is putting them right back where they were. Sometimes it's modifying them and putting them back, and sometimes it's discarding them. And I think that does take that effort and that work. And I just want to say that, for people who might be new to this podcast or anything, that Hogan is the one who started this podcast, and I started out as a listener and a friend of Hogan's, and would text him weekly and tell him how much I was enjoying it. And I think one of the things that attracted me to this format that Hogan kind of created for this conversation is that one of the things that we try to do here is to offer questions and to lay bare the fact that we and the guests who we invite here are asking questions of Scripture. That's why we end our time with what are we going to explore further, because we don't want to take one of these passages and pull out a piece of dogma or doctrine or a truth and say, like, look, here it is. Now we can all sit here and acknowledge this truth. But instead, we're examining it and we're figuring out, where does this fit? How does this work? And I think that the way that we have these conversations and the conversations we invite our guests into on this podcast and is a function and a manifestation of deconstruction in a lot of ways. And I hope that people who might not know how to relate to that word, but join us on a weekly basis, can understand and can appreciate that that's part of what we're doing, and that this is a word that I think is helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I don't want to overreach, I guess, but I do want to just say that deconstruction is hard. Not just in terms of what you're doing within yourself, but also in terms of how you identify or how you relate to people who maybe gave you the faith that you have, right? So I think particularly with my family, there are parts of my faith that are difficult to discuss because we just came down on very different places. And so it's a shift, right? And so I just want to encourage folks, if you're interested in deconstruction, if deconstruction is something you're actively doing, but you haven't found a community to engage with, I don't know that Harrison and I can be your community, but we're certainly happy to connect over that. But find people to do this with. It can be a challenging and lonely process.
Yeah, definitely.
So we're going to go ahead and gently shift over to our scripture for this week. So our scripture this week is from Psalm 45, verses 1 to 6. And again, this is from the Revised Common Lectionary. And Harrison, you sent me a tweet this week. Do you remember the date that the Revised Common Lectionary came out? If not, I can pull it up.
I'm going to say, I'm guessing, I don't remember. I'm going to say 86 is what I remember. Let's see.
I think 1986 is right.
83.
83.
Yep.
And then it's based off something from the 60s. Is that right?
Yep. So the Revised Common Lectionary was built off of something that came out of the Roman Catholic Church from 1969. And so this is a tweet from Melissa Floral Bixler, and she I follow her on Twitter and connect with a lot of things that she says, but she was just kind of expressing one of the things that we've expressed regularly here, of this is not an ancient piece of our faith. Like this is a new thing that is good and helpful in a lot of ways, but also deserves some criticism and some close looking, as I think all aspects of our faith do.
Yeah, for sure. In full disclosure, we are reading Psalm 145, 1 to 6. The new, the lectionary says, or is advising verses 1 and 2, and then 6 through 9. So we'll see. Maybe we should go through verse 9. We'll see what we end up with. So again, that's Psalm 45, 1 to 6, and we're reading the New Revised Standard Version. My heart overflows with a goodly theme. That's a word you don't hear often. I address my verses to the king. My tongue is like the pen of a ready scribe. You are the most handsome of men. Grace is poured upon your lips. Therefore, God has blessed you forever. Gird your sword high on your, I added high there. Gird your sword on your thigh. One mighty one in your glory and majesty. In your majesty, ride on victoriously for the cause of truth and to defend the right. Let your right hand teach you dread deeds. Your arrows are sharp. In the heart of the king's enemies, the peoples fall under you. Your throne, O God, endures forever and ever. Your royal scepter is a scepter of equity. And I'm going to continue on to verse 9. You love righteousness and hate wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. Your robes are all fragrant with myrrh and aloes and cassia. From ivory palaces, stringed instruments make you glad. Daughters of kings are among your ladies of honor. At your right hand stands the queen in gold of Ophir. So that is Psalm 45, 1 through 9, and that was hard to read. I'll start there. So we'll begin talking about the scripture for about 5 minutes here, and that's where I want to begin. Scripture is hard to read sometimes, and this, I think, particularly this, the heading that is given in the NRSV here is "Ode for a Royal Wedding," and so it's poetic, right? And as we've talked about before, it's a poem that is translated multiple times, and man, poetry doesn't translate well.
Yeah.
And so I just want to point out there are a few words here that I struggled with. So gird, was one. I couldn't tell you the exact definition of gird. Goodly theme is not a word we hear often. I feel like there were others. Cassia, I don't know exactly what that is, but yeah. What caught you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I think what you said of this is poetry, and poetry can be hard to read on site and English when it's, Dr. Seuss rhyming words. Like that can be a tough thing to do, never mind when it's translated and from a different culture. And I think that
Yeah,
we've spent a good bit of time in the Psalms at this point, and I'm glad that we do that, and I am happy that we engage these texts. But it is just a reminder, kind of on a weekly basis at this point, of like, man, poetry is tough. And it and honestly, like if we want to kind of move back to this deconstruction idea, it's a reminder to me of the purpose of the Bible, right?
mm,
For a lot of my life, I believe the Bible to be essentially this handbook that you could pick up and open to any page, and it would tell you the voice of God, no questions asked. But this is barely about God. Like this
yeah,
is the heading we have here is Ode for a Royal Wedding to the leader according to the lilies of the Koraites, a Maskell, a love song. So this is like a part of wedding liturgy. And my understanding of this passage was that it is being read about the groom in a wedding, right? And it is kind of praising the groom of this wedding. And it, God has blessed you. It says that God's throne lasts forever, and then it says God has anointed you. But for the most part, it's about how beautiful and wonderful and strong and powerful the groom is. And yes, we can go into these interpretations of, the bride of Christ and Jesus and, and all those kinds of things. I think that's a stretch looking at this Psalm, and I'm sure people have made that stretch before, but it's just reading Psalms like this is a reminder to me that the Bible is a collection of writings. The Bible is more of a library than a book, and that they have purposes in of themselves. And for us to appropriate those purposes is sometimes not helpful and sometimes just wrong to do.
yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. It would be anachronistic, right, to say that this is about Jesus, right? Like
Yeah.
the author of this or whoever put this down or included it in the Psalms, that was not their intention. They did not know that Jesus was going to live or who Jesus was going to be, any of those sorts of things. So, yeah, I think you're right. It would be a stretch. The other thing that I find so interesting here, and you were hitting at this, right? This is not devotional, right? Like this is not something that we would typically read in a Bible study and take away some great truth. We got a little piece of someone's culture here, and we're getting to interact with that and read it, and that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what do you think about that? Like this is not something that I guess when I think scripture, I almost often think something from the Pentateuch, right? The first 5 books of the Bible in the Old Testament, which are these kind of histories where we get the history of Israel, or I think the New Testament, right, which is stories of Jesus or stories of the apostles or some sort of kind of moral or ethical letter from someone, right? This doesn't fit any of those categories, and it feels a little odd to me to be included in the canon.
Yeah, so let's talk about canon a little bit, right? So if we talk about the Pentateuch being those first 5 books, the books of law, and then we have some history stuff there, right? We have I'm looking at a list of the books of the Bible. We have Joshua and Judges, Ruth, 1st, 2nd, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Those are all like historical books, and then we get into Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, which are commonly known as the writings, right? And I think this is that's what we're encountering here. We're encountering collections of writings that Psalm 45 is in this because this is almost this culture's book of common prayer, right? It's a book of songs and prayers and liturgies that are used in a variety of different ways. And I think you're right. And I appreciate what you said about like, it's beautiful to encounter a culture like this and to have this preserved and be a part of our faith. I think that what is necessary for us to do is to recognize what it is and appreciate it for what it is and not try to make it something else. I think that's where we can kind of get ourselves tripped up. And so I know that we're about to get to the question of, what next? What do we do with this next? And I'm back at the place where a few weeks ago I said I'm done here because I was kind of frustrated with the lectionary, and this week I feel like I'm done here, but not out of any frustration or anything, but just like I appreciated the poetry. I appreciate these words of beauty. One of the things that struck me was the man was called beautiful, which is something that I don't think of often as a word to describe men, but I have been called beautiful before by like a stranger one time, and like I still remember it. It was I was a kid, and in like it's one of those things where like it is
Hmm.
a word that can describe anyone and can be meaningful, and to hear that as a part of a wedding liturgy is kind and beautiful, and I appreciate it being in there. But I also, like you said, like this isn't a devotional text for me. I don't think I'm going to spend more time dwelling on these words kind of as I go forward in the week. What about you?
Yeah, I'm at the same place. I'm interested to what comes next, right? This whole chapter is has the same title, an ode for a royal wedding, and I'm just glancing at verse 10, and we start with "Hear, O daughter."
Mm,
So I'm yeah, I want to know it in its fullness, but besides that, I'm good.
yeah.
Um, I connecting to this a little bit, I recently have started reading a book of short stories.
Mm,
I typically read really long novels. That's what I do for fun, like, 700 pages that really drag on. But there's something wonderful about reading something for 5 minutes and being done and it being whole and complete. And that's where I'm at with this. I'm content.
yeah. Yeah. And I think this has been a part of the journey for me, right? Of that's okay. So the Bible doesn't always have to be something that changes our lives every time we encounter it. Sometimes it can be something beautiful and something we appreciate. That's a part of our faith. That's a part of our heritage. And then spend some time with it, and then move on to something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we close, I just want to ask one question. Oh, did you ever, when you were a kid, or maybe now, I don't know, you felt like you needed something from God and you would just like open the
Oh, yeah.
Bible and like, oh,
Yeah.
and then you read it and it's one of these and you're like, I'm 8. Am I supposed to get married soon?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely. I definitely remember having, like open the Bible, let the pages fall where they may. That's what I'm going to read. Like that was like my devotional experience for a while of like, I didn't know what I was supposed to read or what I was supposed to do. And I was like, all right, God, you pick. Yeah. And you can get into some really good stuff. Like sometimes, it's great. And sometimes you read something, you're like, I didn't even know that was in there. And I kind of wish it wasn't. But you're, a
Yeah.
lot of, I wasn't allowed to say that as a kid. Like that wasn't a part of something I allowed myself. So it was just like, all right, well, now I have this either random wedding liturgy or this grotesque story as my devotional for today. Thanks be to God. And then, you go on with whatever comes next.
Yeah. Yeah. So on that note, we invite you to go home, or if you're yeah, if you're not home wherever you are, if you have a Bible, just drop it open, see where you land. And maybe that's the voice of God. But
Yeah. And
also
then
maybe
find a friend, make a podcast. I mean, that's what you do,
that
right?
is this show.
So maybe we shouldn't disparage that practice too much.
Well, if you have found us and listened to us this far, we would encourage you to like and subscribe wherever you found us. Please share the podcast to someone that you think might enjoy it. And of course, we'll be back next week. And until then, keep trying to read the Bible.